thank you all for being here today. It's a very special moment. This is a moment of celebration, and is this with this spirit of joy that I would like to present this event today and to welcome Eduardo Viveiros de Castro. So I wrote some notes here, and I start with some important thankful notes. First of all, I express my gratitude to the Center for Latin American Studies and its Associate Director Elizabeth Sainz, its Director Rodolfo Dirso, Laura Kirarte, who made this event possible by their sponsorship. Also the Department of Iberian and Latin American Cultures and the DLCL, represented by its staff, Charles Robinson, Lucas Cole, and Alan Schuto. And certainly a special thanks to the Humanities Center, in special to Katja Zeljart, Associate Director, who offered this lovely place to us, to our event today. Also the Department of Anthropology, its Director James Ferguson, and the intermediation of Jean Clifford from UC Santa Cruz. I extend my gratitude to my colleague Eva Domanska, who promoted the event among our colleagues archaeologists and also in the Modern Thought and Literature program. Thanks, Eva. And finally, a very special thank to our graduate students, certainly Fatoumata Seck, who worked with me and coordinated a whole year of events that is finalizing today in Viveiros de Castro. Also thanks to the cooperation of Victoria Saramago and Frederico Freitas, who Frederico Fred did the wonderful poster, one of the wonderful posters for this event. And also Tom Winterbottom, who helped translate some passages in a very urgent request, and all of you who are here. A special thanks also to Pascal Rochette, who happens to be my husband, and who very kindly offered one of his paintings to be part of the second poster that we did. And of course, thanks for all you here today. We are all anxious to listen to hear Viveiros de Castro, but I would like to make 3 points about his presentation and his presence today. The importance of his work in my own work since I have arrived here in 2009. In fact, since my job talk in 2008, and I can say easily that part of the fact that I'm working in Stanford is his fault, or part of his talk that I have adapted to the Amerindian perspectivism into the literature field. And so since the work that I have presented and developing here is this connection between literature and anthropology, this cross-communication. And so this is part of what we are hearing today in his presentation about Clarice, Lispector and Guimarães Rosa. We had other events related to literature and anthropology. One of them was with Michael Tosick in 2010, when he spoke about humming. Very interesting speech. And courses and other talks about literature and anthropology. The second aspect that I would like to refer in terms of the contagious impact of Viveiros de Castro thought and work is related to the social activism aspect of his work and presence in Brazil. And in fact, it's not possible to work and to think about indigenous in Brazil today outside of social activism related to the survival of these groups and communities and their land rights. So for this reason also my talk here today is dedicated to the memory, or my presentation dedicated to the memory of Osiel Gabriel, a Terena Indian who was killed on May 30, past week, after an agrarian conflict in Mato Grosso do Sul. So I pass for you along some images that will talk better about this aspect that is really occurring in Brazil today. But the third aspect that I would like to highlight is what Viveiros de Castro work represents for us Brazilians, and is related to his proposal of a philosophical thought, anthropologically oriented, that gives the epistemological rights and the intensive incentive to each Brazilian to reclaim their or our own indigeneity or indianidad. In Brazil, everyone is Indian except who is not. It's one of his famous sentences that had become part of a collective slogan adopted to youth scholars and artists. But also I think that this sentence could be applied to the impact of his work outside Brazil in an international sphere, creating a community where no matter from who or from where you are, you all can also say, in Brazil everyone is Indian and so am I. And this is part of, I think, the structure of the philosophy proposed by Viveiros de Castro, that is considered indigenous people not as objects of study but as interlocutors, so that there might be an effective dialogue. So for all these reasons and much more, please join me in a very warm welcome to Eduardo Viveiros de Castro.
Okay, it's my turn now?
Yes, now it's your turn.
Well, I'd like to thank you all for coming to be here, and Clarice, of course, to Marília, of course, inviting me to come here. This is my first time actually in California, first time in Stanford. This is the first time I speak about something which is not directly connected to my own speciality. First time I speak about Brazilian writers, so non-Brazilian audience. So all these things make me quite a bit intimidated. So, and also I haven't, for many reasons, I couldn't have a rounded, well-rounded, written down presentation. So what I'm going just to share with you are some the outlines of an article, maybe a little book that I may be able to write in the near future. And so I beg your indulgence for these shortcomings. What I'm like to present you as by way of a few comments on it's something about two short stories actually. One is a novel, but it's a short novel, and the other is a long short story by the two greatest Brazilian writers of the 20th century, namely Guimarães Rosa, fiction writers, prose writers of the 20th century, Guimarães Rosa and Clarice Lispector, who lived more or less, who have flowered more or less at the same time, and who belonged more or less to the same social background, both were connected to it. Guimarães Rosa was a diplomat, Clarice Lispector was married to a diplomat, and they lived a good part of their lives abroad, away from Brazil. Otherwise, they are completely different, totally different social backgrounds and totally different personal histories. The two texts I am actually comparing in a way. Very different texts, and to my knowledge, they have never been directly compared as such. It's entirely different. One is the Guimarães Rosa text is called Portuguese the Jaguar, meaning my uncle, the Jaguar. The Jaguar, the word Jaguar is a Tupi, an Indian word, a Brazilian word, has been exported to all languages. And in Portuguese, it's Jaguar. It's not, we don't use for some irony in it. Normally in Brazil, we don't use the term Jaguar, we use the term onça, which is a classic Greek-derived term, which is the same term as lynx. It comes from the same root as lynx in French and in Portuguese as well, because we do have lynxi as well, but lynxi and onça are the same cognates. And Brazil normally uses onça, but jaguarete means the true jaguar, which is my uncle. Then it's my uncle, the true jaguar. The true jaguar means the jaguar which is the spotted jaguar, as opposed to the puma or the black jaguar. And the other text is Clarice Lispector's quite famous novel titled passion according to GH. So, and my ideas, these two texts came together in my mind for 2 or 3 different reasons. But especially, well, I probably have to do some kind of biographic narrative, by way of introduction. This is why I am here before you talking about literature, since I am a professional anthropologist who has never studied literature, etc. I started as a sociologist, and my undergraduate course as a sociologist, I had classes with a teacher of sociology of literature, Lispector, who has also been an important figure in Marília's career. And Costa Lima, at that time, Costa Lima was writing about Guimarães Rosa, and I helped him, and we were part of it. I was kind of an assistant. And I started reading Guimarães Rosa with an analytical way because of this introduction as an assistant of Luis Costa Lima. Clarice I only discovered, to my shame, to my profound embarrassment, very recently because of my daughter. Because Clarice was someone who she was a contemporary of my father in law school. And I thought of her as a kind of sentimental writer and I didn't take her seriously. And then and especially because her books were used in high school as exemplars of Brazilian literature, because they're quite easy to read, in the sense of there are no difficult words or no difficult syntactical constructions, etc. Which the opposite case of Guimarães, which is a very complex, linguistically speaking, craftsman of invented words, etc. While Clarice writes absolutely plain Portuguese. It can be translated in any language only with a dictionary. There's no, absolutely plain. But my daughter had this one of books of short stories. I think it was Felicidade Clandestina, clandestine happiness. And I started browsing it, and then I was absolutely astonished at how come I am 60 years old and I've spent my life in Brazil without having ever paid attention to Clarice Lispector's work. In the second book, then I read this whole book, which is a book of short stories. I found absolutely magnificent. And then the second book I came across was The Passion According to GH, which is like a punch in your stomach. It's an absolutely astonishing book. And written in a sort of alien tongue, as Proust famously said about all great writers, because the words are exactly the same that you use, but they sound entirely different. They start meaning something entirely different when just what is it that's writing that. And the point about this, but then, as I told you, I discovered Guimarães very early in my life, Clarice very late. And in between, I became an anthropologist. And I started studying indigenous scripts of Brazil. And by coincidence, people I lived with for longer was a Tupian-speaking group who speaks the same language as the 16th century Brazilian Tupinambá Indians of the Brazilian coast, who are the iconic, classic, literary Indians of Brazil. And then much of what I learned, I learned the language of the Arabic text people I work with, mostly thanks to the 16th century grammars written by the Jesuit missionaries, because the language was fairly close, to the point that you could use a 16th century grammar to help you to learn the Arabic language, since they were monolingual. They didn't speak Portuguese at the time I was with them in the early 80s. And a classical theme of Tupian ethnography, of Tupian-speaking people's ethnography, is their ritual cannibalism. They are one of the classic cases of ritual cannibalism, in which they captured enemies in warfare. Their warfare was a ritual warfare, made in order to capture enemy victims in order to be executed public plaza of the village, and this was absolutely essential for young men to become initiated into adulthood and be able to speak in public, and etc., etc. And there's also a extreme elaboration of revenge as a theme, as a sociological theme. Revenge was a very important theme in European cultures, and was connected to the theory of time and of memory. And in a very complex way, I won't go into this here. But I started being obliged to get interested in ritual anthropophagy because the Europeans were, well, famous for that. And the group I worked with, they were there when they were not, or no longer, had never been, I never managed to discover that they were not cannibals at all. But the cannibalism was a central motive in their cosmology. And it was a motive which was elaborated along pretty much the same lines as what we could read in the 16th century literature about real social processes that Tupinamba society was engaged in, meaning that I would translated the theme of anthropophagy, of ritual anthropophagy, ritual cannibalism, to their eschatology. And so their gods were defined as cannibals. The relationship between the living and the dead was conceived pretty much in the same general terms as Tupinamba conceived of relations between them and their enemies. And the gods are the enemies in their case. So it's complicated a bit with a lot of things because we normally tend to think of gods as kind of augmented, aggrandized version of ourselves, while they think of them as aggrandized versions of their enemies, which is an interesting thing to begin with. And when I started analyzing European ethnography, I immediately remember my early days as a student in high school times when I was involved in the culture wars of the time in Brazil, which divided the left, as a matter of fact. It was a war, as usual, of the left against the left, in which there were two, and this was the cultural left, it was talking about cultural Marxism. And it was two main trends. They are still there in Brazil, which is the people who tended to adopt a populist, nationalist, folk-oriented the idea of roots and etc., a purely Brazilian, very nationalist position, and the other half, to which I belonged, who are, on the contrary, advocated a sort of opening up of Brazilian culture and of internationalization of music and the adoption of electric guitars in Brazilian music and etc. And this was a very important discussion at the time. It divided the left between two aesthetic schools, which are aesthetic or political schools. And one of these trends, the internationalizing and more hippie-like trend, as opposed to the more militant, Bolshevik, as we used to call it, trend, was had as one of its major figures was João de Andrade, who is famous Brazilian modernist, or even hyper-modernist, hyper-modernist, who created, proposed this concept of anthropophagy. He wrote the famous Anthropophagus Manifesto. It was a pastiche of the Communist Manifesto, by the way, in which he used the metaphor. Metaphor is not the right metaphor for it anyway, but he used the metaphor of cannibalism, of anthropophagy, as a way of describing the relations between Brazilian culture and dominant cultures of today, and also as a sort of aesthetical, political, metaphysical, in fact, outlook, which went way beyond nationalist questions, and it was way more than a theory of Brazil. It was an anthropology. It was based in a totally outdated and actually quite crazy anthropology in the sense, the technical sense, but it was absolutely fascinating. And he, as artists I want to do, to transform these absurdities, anthropological absurdities, in profound political, aesthetical truths. And this anthropology, updated the point, was basically Bachofen and Freud and, well, the primitive matriarchate, and his idea that the Pinabau were actually a matriarchal society, absolutely false. They were staunchly patriarchal, but well, nobody's perfect. But he devised a primitive society as a matriarchal state. It's Bachofen, the classic Bachofen theory of matriarchy before matriarchy, etc. And then he connected anthropophagy to matriarchy. That's interesting. Anthropophagy was the basic, well, it's just a rereading of Freud backwards. Okay? It was a totem taboo backwards, and actually he said we have to transform the taboo into totem all the time. Anthropophagy is about the transformation of taboo into totem. And that's a whole anthropology connected to this. But he used anthropophagy as a slogan. And he referred to the 16th century materials on the Tupinambá as his sort of ethnographic background. And he had a quite perceptive reading of these materials. And I think he was basically correct in the way he read these materials. And I think he had a sort of almost supernatural grasp of what was really at stake in these complex rituals of anthropophagy, etc., considering that his anthropology was absolutely absurd. He had, on the contrary, a superb ethnographic intuition. And so, well, and I was a great fan of Oswald, his writings and the Anthropophagy Manifesto, etc. When I, for different reasons, started studying Tupian groups as an ethnographer, this whole thing started reconnecting in different ways. And a group who talked about anthropophagy all the time because their eschatology was based on the idea of cannibal gods and etc. This complex of ideas started, well, fermenting, let's say, in my head. And then I came across this text by Rosa, this short story. Rosa never has been a great, never been my great idol, as it means to many people in Brazil. I studied him with Louise, etc., but it was not my writer, my great writer. I'm more of a Machado de Assis type of guy, probably. But when I came across the Meu Tio Jaguar, my uncle Jaguar, I was absolutely astonished because it was a text which I read as a direct transformation, almost in the Levi-Straussian sense, a transformation of the theme of anthropophagy, and especially of the cultural theme of anthropology, that is, anthropophagy as a reflexive, apperceptive notion that Brazilian literature had been playing with for, at that moment, 30 or 40 years, when Guimarães wrote my uncle in Jaguar, which was 1956. And this is a story which is very simple to, my uncle Jaguar is very simple to tell blood. It is about a mixed blood Jaguar hunter, Indian mother, white father, typical, and he's a Jaguar hunter who was being hired to exterminate the jaguars of a certain area of the backlands, so that the cattle raisers could cattle on that land. And then he was a Jaguar hunter, was there to wipe out the jaguars. And then as he kills the jaguars, he becomes more and more regretful. And he starts little by little identifying himself with the jaguars he had killed, and actually more or less begins to expiate the crime that he had committed against the jaguars. And the whole story is told from a very peculiar, so it's an invention by Guimarães, a very peculiar point of view, in which the story is narrated by the Jaguar hunter. It's actually what we read is the voice of the Jaguar hunter speaking to an invisible interlocutor who is never shown, who never speaks, who only appears in the discourse, in the words of the Jaguar hunter when he does something. You know that he has done this thing because the Jaguar, the narrator, let's say, comments on what he's doing. And he's obviously a white, rich, fat, rich, white person because the Jaguar hunter keeps referring to him as you massive, fat, dowdy, and he's armed, has a revolver, and he has a big gallon of cachaça, of alcohol. And he keeps giving alcohol to the Jaguar hunter to drink. And he gets drunker and drunker. And as he gets more and more drunk, he starts losing its Portuguese. He speaks in Portuguese, a very broken and very, very well regional Portuguese. With plenty of European-derived words, which is a basic language, which is a língua geral, as we call it in Brazil, which is a língua franca of the first centuries of the colonization. And plenty of words of Turkey have passed into Portuguese, especially names of animal names and place names, etc. But also some terms of phrases, etc. And then little by little, the Jaguar hunter starts losing its Portuguese and speaks more and more European-derived words and more asyntactical phrases, and loses its syntax and becomes more and more speaking in interjections. Starts using more and more interjections and expletives and well, these kinds of words which are intensive, words which express emotion, pure emotion. And you realize that is actually, and then he starts telling you what's his narrating, is his life story. And he narrates how he, how he killed jaguars, how he got absolutely sick of killing jaguars and started killing people. And then he describes how he started giving people that he killed to the jaguars to eat. The jaguars that remained. And then he describes also how he gets more and more intimate with the jaguars because he knows jaguars intimately. He was a jaguar killer. And then he starts giving proper names, personal names of each jaguar that he knew, and he had a special fixation in a female jaguar called Marília, Mary, and whom should be described as a person. He describes in very erotic terms. It's obvious that he has had what we call this bodily commerce with this jaguar. It's, in other words, pretty clear that the guy is becoming a jaguar as the narrative progresses. And in the end, you have this, and he gets stronger and more animal-like in his speech, because you don't see, nothing is described. Guimarães does not describe the process of becoming a jaguar. He inscribes this process in the sense that the transformation is done through the language and as a linguistic transformation. It's the language of the narrative itself which gets more and more jaguarized, because it gets more and more, to begin with, Tupinized, let's say. He speaks more and more in Tupian words, and he speaks less and less in human words, because he becomes more and more speaking with these purely intensive, almost cries, almost pure cries of emotion. The end of the narrative goes like very movement upwards in the sense of it's getting more and more tense, and in the end, the story ends in media res, because what we deduce is that the guy has become a jaguar, in the sense not in the transforming his appearance, but it has completely started. He has completely becomes someone who was seeing things as a Jaguar sees, and he jumps on over the narrator who shoots him. But he had a revolver all the time. Because you know this because the Jaguar hunter says, but you could they touch your revolver? It's a nice piece of work, like. And then no, okay, so no problem. So the whole thing is told from the Jaguar's point of view. And in the end, he jumps, he leaps, and you almost hear the shot because it ends with screams and something like that. The scream of he starts speaking pure to P. Then he says something like, "Don't do this. Or you hurt me," or something like that. And then you have the impression that he killed. He's dead at the end. He actually doesn't eat this invisible narrator, the true subject of the narrative of the dialogue. Actually, this is not a dialogue. It's a very peculiar way that Guimarães was invented, and which he applied in the famous big novel, The Devil to Pay the Backlines, which is classic, great. And probably that's one of the reasons he never published my Uncle the Jaguar until much later in his career, although he wrote it very early. It's because of that particular invention of this telling a story from the point of view of someone who's telling it to an invisible narrator to whom the readers immediately identify in this invisible person. Because as a matter of fact, we are all rich, fat, white persons who are in front of comparing to this Jaguar hunter who's there. And well, so this is the Guimarães Rosa story of a mixed blood guy who gets obsessed with the fact that he was killing jaguars, identified the jaguars, and is in the process of becoming a jaguar and eating his interlocutor, and is shot at the end. But you don't know whether he was killed or if he managed to actually get the guy, get the narrator. And actually, also you don't know, and this is a very interesting point, that if this person who was being addressed by the Jaguar hunter was there by accident, as it appears at the beginning of the tale, in the sense that the Jaguar hunter said, "Oh, you hear what? You lost? Oh, come in, you can enter," etc. And he uses the same invitation that you do to vampires. "No, you can come in." A vampire can only enter your house, as you all know, of course, if you invite them. Vampires can only enter your house if you invite them to enter. Otherwise, they won't enter. So he's invited to come, and the whole narrative runs as if he was there lost and a bit sick, probably of malaria. He was a bit feverish. Jaguar hunter said, "Oh, you don't look so well, so maybe you would like to sleep a bit." And then the guy refuses to sleep, obviously, because he's afraid of being eaten by. But he keeps giving cachaça to the Jaguar hunter. But one critic, I think it was Juan José Sayre, the great Argentinian writer, who wrote a beautiful piece on My Uncle the Jaguar, raising the suspicion, which I think he was right, that actually this invisible person went there to kill the Jaguar. He is actually a hired gun to kill the Jaguar killer who had turned a man killer. He was actually envoyed there. He was an envoy of the same cattle raisers, but now to get rid of that mixed blood had become an annoyance, because it had become an assassin. So I think he was right, at least Sayre is right. This guy may be, Sayre compares him to Theseus and the Minotaur. It's like if it was Theseus coming to the labyrinth and getting face to face with the Minotaur. And the Minotaur is a Jaguar hunter. And this, I think, is quite a sharp reading of the tale. But anyway, the tale is about a Jaguar becoming, an animal becoming of a human being. And anthropophagy is always described because it tells this interlocutor how he had killed 7 people And these 7 killings correspond, because Guimarães was a little bit, let's say, he liked a bit of, put some kind of hidden clues in that text, etc. He was also an occultist and a Freemason and a Rosicrucian and all that sort of thing. These 7 people each one was killed because he committed one of the 7 capital sins. So the first one was killed because he was actually a very avaricious person. Second one because he was a wrathful person. The other one because he was a lustful one, and so it goes. So the 7 capital sins. It may have some connection with Dante's Inferno, because it's a kind of spiral in which you get more and more terrible sins, and so may have some kind of, because Dante was a very important reference to Guimarães. So there is a whole kind of classical background to this text. Also there is a classic Lycaon Greek myth about the guy who becomes a wolf, etc. And but then this is a story about the Jaguar becoming of a mixed blood person. Clarice Lispector's story is entirely different. It's nothing to do with this. It's about how a woman becomes woman. It's about a becoming woman of woman, in the sense that this is a whole story about, it's a kind of feminist, if you will, not in no sense of the term, in fact, feminist trajectory, in which a rich upper middle class, bourgeois, white housewife who lives in a penthouse in Copacabana has a sort of epiphanic encounter with a cockroach. She goes to the, and this is all. The Passion according to GH is a woman whose name is GH, is actually a person without a name. The whole story is about taking out the names of things and how things, what things look like when they have no names, etc. And but the whole story is about, it's 150 pages or something, about this woman rich woman who happens to have this epiphanic encounter with a cockroach in the abandoned room of a maid. She had the maid, and she goes to the room in order to clean it, and discovered the room is entirely clean. It's completely empty. There's nothing in the room, and the room begins to take strange geometric properties and very bizarre, ways of behaving. It's very much like Alice in Wonderland, as a matter of fact. That's why I like to call them. I would write a chapter on Clarice in Wonderland. Or Clarice through the looking glass, because it's like actually she starts one of the very first lines of the novel says, I have always lived within a mirror, and now I'm out of it. And so it's actually the Clarice out of the looking glass, because that's the whole idea, is how she went out of the mirror and gets into reality, which is, as usual, way stranger than the world in the mirror. As you probably recall, through the looking glass in the book by Lewis Carroll, he says something like, well, the world in the other side of the mirror was just like this one here, except what was not shown. Meaning the room, there was a looking glass in the room, and Alice enters the looking glass world. And what corresponds to our world is exactly the same, because it was the image of what was outside the frame was entirely different. And it's a bit what happens in Clarice's narrative. She enters a maid's room, and it's pretty much an empty room, but it's little by little we realize it's completely different. And the only thing that's in the room, it's an old cupboard. And she opens the door of the cupboard, and then there is this big, huge, fat, black, that's very important, cockroach, because the bait was also black. And she tries to kill the cockroach, just slamming the door of the cupboard against the cockroach. But the cockroach gets is half crushed by the door and stays half alive. very big, that white thing spotting out of the cockroach, etc. And she had, then the narrator, this woman, GH, she had a kind of epiphany and starts actually a delirium, a kind of unhistorical delirium. She's transported to, the room becomes Egypt, becomes a desert, becomes moving sand, and then she begins going down to the depths of the earth and going up. There's a whole sort of Alice-looking sort of movements. And the cockroach is the black cockroach is actually the white rabbit of Clarice. And the cockroach is obviously, at least to my reading, the black maid had been dismissed, who left the cockroach as a sort of sorcery object, voodoo object, because she had also drawn in the walls, in one wall, there was a silhouette of a man, a woman, and a dog. And this transforms the room immediately, according to GH, into a Paleolithic cave. And she starts receding back into the past. And then she starts speaking about 3,000 million years ago, and etc. So the whole time and space get completely out of joint in this room. This room is a kind of magical box in which she gets completely carried away by all sorts of ideas. And then she eats the cockroach. At the peak of the epiphany, she decides to eat the cockroach as a sort of diabolic communion, Eucharist, because the cockroach is a sort of anti-holy wafer. And the whole tone of the book and the language that she uses is reminiscent of biblical and prophetic and, esoteric literature, but above all biblical. Clarice was a Jewish woman whose family flew Ukraine when she was 2. Her mother was raped by Cossacks, got syphilis, died in Brazil when Clarice was 3. So she was raped by her father and her 2 sisters. She became a Brazilian because she started speaking Portuguese when she was 3 or 4. And she always spoke with a very strange accent, with a lisp and an accent which is a mixture of northeastern accent, which is very distinctive in Brazil, with this kind of pseudo-Yiddish, dreamlike kind of language that she must have heard when she was very, very, very young. Then she spoke in a very bizarre Portuguese. And oh yes, because the whole story of J.H. is a passion. It's a passion according to J.H. So it's a history of passion. And so J.H. is a bit like Christ, only it's a female Christ. And also it's a kind of Eve, because there's a whole story about the primordial times and going back to the creation time, etc. But it's an anti-Adamic Eve, because she takes out the name of things. Instead of naming things, she starts unnaming things, and things starts losing their names and becoming themselves. That's the whole idea. There is the whole theme of getting to the heart of things, getting to the what's called the wild heart of things. So one important point is that you don't see, meaning you can't read the moment. She doesn't describe the moment when she eats cockroach, because she loses consciousness. She loses consciousness when, at the very moment when she is going to eat the cockroach. So you don't read it. She can't remember the moment, the exact moment when she ate the cockroach. Exactly as you can't see the transformation, the final transformation of the jaguar hunter into a jaguar, because there is a sort of introduction while the Clarice, in the case of the novel by Clarice Lispector, the story continues after she eats the cockroach, but it jumps over. And she starts after the eating of the cockroach, this sort of Eucharistic, diabolic Eucharistic experience. She starts reverting to her normal state, so that, and she somehow failed in a sense, because she reverts. She has gone. Finally, she went out to the great outdoors. Let's say she went into. That's how she describes it. She finally, when she entered the room of the maid, she has a sort of epiphanic experience and gets in touch with, let's say, outer space, outer ontological space, outer metaphysical space. But after eating the cockroach, she sort of kind of realized that she cannot actually live in outer space. So she has to enter back to the mirror, in a sense. Life outside the mirror is very, apparently, extremely bleak and dangerous and exciting, but at the same time it's non-human. Actually, the whole story is a story about the dehumanization of GH. How she loses what she calls my human frame. Montage, probably frame, my human scaffold. And the whole story is about how she loses humanity, and at the same time how she goes through all, let's say, all stages. It's like a passion. You have the 12 stages of the passion. She goes through all stages of a kind of regression. First she becomes a maid, was a poor woman. Then she becomes a woman in general. Then she becomes kind of generic, pure womanhood, pure genetic, in all senses of the term, womanhood. And then she becomes a particle, a molecule. She starts talking of herself as a sort of abstract object in a cosmos which is entirely composed of primordial substance. And of course she becomes the cockroach, because she's the cockroach. She was eating herself. It's quite clear that the narrator was describing a case of self-anthropophagy. She was actually eating self in the process of eating the cockroach. So there you have the two plots. It's a case of a human being that becomes, tries to become, or is in the process of becoming something else, and through the mediation of an animal, because finally, and that's my interpretation of, to begin with, the Guimarães Rosa novel. I read it not at all as about how, not as a story of a lycanthropy story, a story of how humans become jaguars or how humans become wolves, etc. I think this is a story that tells you what happens to a mixed blood person who decides to become Indian again. It is killed. You are not supposed to become an Indian again. You're not supposed to revert to, because the history only goes one way. You were an Indian, you're going to become Indian. You are becoming. The whole process of the Brazilian historical process thing is thought in terms of primitive people being civilized and becoming by the Europeans, Indian people being civilized by Europeans and becoming white. So becoming white is going along the right sense, on the right sense of history. Becoming an Indian is impossible. You can only unbecome an Indian. You can only cease being an Indian. And what happens in this, the case of the narrator of the Jaguar hunter is that actually he's a mixed blood who he's a renegade. He denies, he explicitly said, I don't like my father. I hate my father. My father is a bad man, very bad man. My mother, on the other hand, was quite okay. She was okay. She was nice to me, and then she starts connecting. Her mother was an Indian, who was called Marília, by the way. The whole story has a deep Oedipal context, and he phrases the relationship between himself and the Jaguars as I belong to the Jaguar people through my mother, and the Jaguar is my uncle, meaning the Jaguar is thought as a male. The Jaguar in general, with a big capital J, is my uncle.
No, please, sorry.
And so, well, what this guy is describing is a matriarchal society. I belong to the tribe of my mother. My mother's brother is my real father, in the sense that I have to do with my mother's brother, I have nothing to do with my father. My loyalties, my connections are with my mother's brother, who, as you know, mother's brother is a classic, anthropological personage, a classical character of anthropology. And what this Jaguar hunter is really indicating is his Jaguar through his mother and his connection to his mother's brother, who is the Jaguar in general, kind of almost like a totemic animal, the Jaguar. And his relationship with that female Jaguar, Marília, which is twice his mother's name. I have this is my own fantasy, but anyway, I am convinced that this Marília is the daughter of my uncle the Jaguar, which would make sense. He would be marrying his matrilateral cross cousin, who is a Jaguar, the daughter of his mother's brother. So this all goes in strict anthropological, makes plenty of anthropological sense. But he was actually, and what's interesting that Guimarães and Rosa had no special connection with Oswald Andrade's idea about the matriarchate, about anthropophagy as a cultural motto, etc. But it was actually describing in pseudo-ethnographic terms, let's say, a case of primitive matriarchate in which people were related to the mother's group rather than to the father's group. And this state of this matriarchal state is connected mysteriously with anthropophagy. Okay. This is not a case of cannibalism, mind you, because cannibal means eating your own kind. But the whole story is precisely about the Jaguar hunter is not of the same kind as the human he killed. He's an anthropophagus person, because he eats humans, but he's not human himself. He ceases, as he ceases being human, he gets more and more anthropophagus. And then, but this, I read these novels, especially in the light of my own engagement, what's happening to Indians today, especially in the light of a fairly recent phenomenon, certainly more recent than Guimarães was a story, is that the phenomenon of the resurgence, the reappearance of Indian people in Brazil. Lots of poor peasant societies, poor peasant communities in Brazil, in the rural backlands of the northeast and Minas Gerais and etc., all over Brazil, whose after the 1988 constitution, the new constitution of Brazil, realized that they were not only actually Indians, but it was probably a good thing to be an Indian, because they had lots of rights that you had as a poor nobody, poor peasant nobody in the backlands of Brazil. So these people who were actually Indians, in the sense that they were Indian, who had been de-Indianized by forced colonization, by being obliged to forget their mother tongue precisely, by being obliged to become Christians, etc., became Indians again, began reivindicating their Indianhood again. And this was a scandal, precisely, because the whole Brazilian myth, which is also the myth of the left, obviously, was that people should go from the Indian state, the peasant state, then to the proletarian state, and then to the millennium of the communist society. So left and right both believed that you can go from Indian to peasant, but you cannot go from peasant to Indian. This is obvious. You can revert. When you mix, mestizos are half Indian, half white, but the idea is that they are going to become 100% white, and not they are going to become 100% Indian again. this would be, what's the point? Why did we invade America before? So, and I think that the Guimarães tale is about what happens to someone who tries to become an Indian again. In the first place, he's identified, or has to identify, with the supreme order of Indian society, which is the Jaguar. The Jaguar is definitely not at all the, let's say, the outer ego of Indians, or rather it is the outer ego, the outer, as a matter of fact. Meaning Jaguar is a very epitome of the enemy in Indian mythology and cosmology. The Jaguar is the outer, the Jaguar is the enemy. And so the identification of the Indian, this Jaguar killer with the Jaguar, is actually a very complex movement, because he is becoming what, if he were a real Indian, let's say, it would be the very image of the other. It is actually the whites who are, many people identify the Jaguar by the Indian, because the whites are cannibals in the sense that they are predators. They are there to take our lives, and etc. But then there is a very complex situation, and in which this Jaguar hunter becomes a Jaguar, means, in my reading, tries to become an Indian again, and then gets killed. So it's a sort of tragic ending of the process, of the version, because Oswald de Andrade's theory of anthropophagy was very solar, very optimistic. The idea that the Indian is something in the future, is something that we're going to become, in the sense of the idea of the Indian as a primitive matriarchate, etc. is what we need to become. Again, we need to recover that solar state of primitivity. Actually, it was a techno-primitivist. Was greatly appreciated modern technology, but he also wanted cannibalism and this idea of ritual, anti-Freudian kind of reversion to a pre-Oedipal state of society, free love, etc. And why was Oswald de Andrade's view of cannibalism as a motor was very solar, very optimistic. Guimarães is a very tragic and somber reality tale. I mean, this is what happens to cannibals nowadays. We kill them, and especially people who were on the road to become wise, etc., who regress, try to revert. There's no going back. That's the idea. Clarice's point is more complex. I think, one thing that is very interesting if you compare the two characters, meaning the authors, Guimarães and Clarice, their style, the prose style, is they couldn't be more different. Guimarães is a very elaborate craftsman, wordsmith. He's someone who invents new words, who is extremely, almost probably untranslatable prose. The Mangle, the Jaguar, the English version, I read it, is certainly not as powerful in terms of, because it's impossible to do it. It's really difficult to translate. While, as I said, Clarice, on the contrary, is perfectly translatable. She is 100% translatable. Very easy to read. You don't even need to know Portuguese to read. Just a bit of French and Latin, Spanish, too. While Guimarães, even Brazilians can't read it if they are not really into it. And but what they both do is something with language, which I think is interesting here, which is, in the Guimarães case, he's actually, as I said, inscribing the transformation. You see, or you hear, you read, the becoming Jaguar as a linguistic event, because the language becomes a Jaguar language. So it is the language itself, it is the code, in the Jacobson sense, it is the code that becomes, deformed, because it's no longer Portuguese as a linguistic code. It's something between Portuguese and Tupian, and then something between language and cry, language and animal cries. So it is a sort of exploding of language from above, let's say, to upwards. Sort of language becomes overcharged with, well, sounds and meanings and etc. While Clarice Lispector is actually someone who, what I call this, erodes language, reduces language with its simplest expression. So that's why Clarice is read by high school learners. There was a, well, give them something easy to read. Okay. So, and then her language is absolutely, she uses words which are very cliche, like love, subject, woman. I mean, in a strong sense, she uses these words in a not just word, but as central, as concepts. And these are words which have lost all meaning. They have been completely, well, eroded by it's commonplace. But she manages to, and what she does after is she destroys language through its simplification in a sense. And at the same time, she explodes language at the level of the semantics.